Now if you look, I'm going to have the same effect for my button when it's not being pushed, when my mouse is over the top, when it's being pushed down, and when it's hit. A simple way to differentiate is maybe to change the color of the text. So what I'm going to do is when it's moused over, I'm going to insert a keyframe right here. I'm going to select my text just by clicking on it with the text tool and selecting, and maybe I'll change, grab a different color just to let you know that it's being so this is what it'll look like when it's normal, and then when I'm over the top of it, it'll be yellow, although that yellow doesn't really work for me. Let's try something. How about blue? There we go. So when it's regular, it has red text, and when I'm over the top of it, it has blue text. Now, note that there's a keyframe here. It's going to be blue also when it's being pressed down and when it's being hit. If I wanted to change the state here, I could just insert a keyframe and change the look and feel, So you can use keyframes. But right now I think this will do it for our button. I'm going to go back to scene 1. Grab my button or click on it. I'm going to add a layer over here in my layers field by clicking new layer. And we'll call this start. And in this, I'll click on this frame here, and let's pull this start button out to the stage right there. And great, I have that. Now I'll just click on my arrow tool and I can scoot this around using my arrow keys just to get it set where I want it. I think that'll look good. Now I want the same button that says stop, and an easy way to do that, since I already did some styling here, is to go up to my button, right click on it, and say duplicate, and this one I'm going to call stop. Say OK. Now if I double click on my stop button here over in my library, it'll let me edit it, and note it still says start, so I have to go in with my text tool. I'll just click right here, and I'll type in stop, and if I click over into this keyframe, it still says start, so I'll click on that, edit that so it says stop as well. And now I have a button that looks pretty much the same as my start, except now it says stop. I'm going to go back over into scene 1 by clicking here, and I'll do the same thing I did before. I'll create a new layer. I'm going to pull this area down a little bit. I'm starting to get too many layers. Here's my new layer called layer 4, and I'm going to type stop. Click on this frame, and that's going to be where I drop my stop button. Okay. Now let's quickly look at the movie. I'll go Control Test Movie, and you see I have my start button and my stop button. But when I click on them, they don't do anything, because what I have not programmed these buttons to do anything. I do note that I get a little underlap as the hydrogen molecule goes by. It goes underneath the buttons, which I can leave, or I can move my buttons a little bit. I'm going to shut my preview. Now notice that the shut button for flash is right next to the close button for the preview, so watch out. I've definitely closed my flash window. It's a reason to hit save. But I always choose this bottom one here that's closing the preview window. Here we go. So I will click save. And maybe I'll click on my button And I'll just pull them down a little bit so I don't get that same overlap as we saw before. And I'm just holding the arrow key down. Good. File save. Now to make a button actually do something, we have to add what are called actions. Before we can add what are called actions, we need to make sure that we have instance names for each of the elements on our stage. When I click on the hydrogen molecule, you'll remember we already added an instance name for hydrogen. When I click my start button, I'm going to add an instance name here, and I'm going to call it start. Button, underscore button. Here I'm going to click stop, and I'll call this stop button. I'll click on my hydroxide molecule, call this hydroxide. Great. Now let's wire these buttons up a little bit. We're going to use what are called actions. Just for sake of fitting within the frame, I'm going to collapse this properties menu here. Notice if you just kind of click outside of the frame, you get the base properties for your movie. This is where you could set something like the background color of the whole stage, frames per second, and the size. And then, as you start to click on elements within your movie, it shows the properties of those single elements. But if you're looking for the property of the game itself, just click kind of out here in this gray and you get the document properties. I'm going to collapse the properties menu. The way that we make the start button start is by clicking on the button itself. So now I have it selected. I could also, you want to hit the button itself to select it, and then open up the actions window. Now I'm going to suggest that you go over here in the actions window to the view options and click expert mode. And what you get is this editor. I'm just going to paste in the code. You could type this in. And what this says is on the release of this button, you notice that this is the action for the start button. On the release of the start button, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to play the hydrogen movie clip, and we called the instance hydrogen, so we say hydrogen dot, and then what are we going to do? We're going to play bracket bracket semicolon. Now you need to have all of these brackets, semicolons. It needs to be written out exactly like this, and the action needs to be put onto the start button itself. And what this says is that when the button is released, it will play the hydrogen molecule. I'm going to copy this and collapse the action down, the action menu. I'm going to click on the stop button itself and open the actions back up. I'm going to paste this right in here. Now this is for the stop button, so it says on release of the stop button for the hydrogen movie clip. Right now it says play, but what I want it to say is dot stop bracket bracket colon. So on the release of the stop button, please stop the hydrogen movie clip. I'm going to close this down. We've added those actions to this button, and it's talking about the hydrogen clip, which is this, and if you recall, that's that tweening that bounces between those 80 clips that we set up. Now let's give this a save, and we'll test our movie. I say test movie. Opens up, and when I click my stop button, let's try to get it to land on the, there we go. This being the objective, we got our H molecule and our oxygen and our two H's, and there's water. If I click start, there we go. Starts to bounce again and stop. Got it. So now I'm going to click this button here, close. We got our start button and our stop button working. We have our hydrogen movie clip that is animated. we've got our hydroxide molecule here. This is just a freestanding element. Oops, and let me make sure I get my, looks like my library disappeared. Let me pull that back over there. Open that up. There we go. Good. Now the next step is we're going to add a bit of messaging, and the way that we do that is we're going to add a new layer, and we're going to call that text. So I'm going to click here, add a layer. Now I've got this scroll button. Now that we're getting lots of layers here, I can scroll. It's right here to the right, up and down. Layer number 5. I'm going to call this one text. Great. And I am going to click on my text tool here and just drop that right there. Now previously we just added what was called static text from this drop down menu for our buttons. What we're going to add now is called dynamic text, and when we do that we actually give the dynamic text a name. Let me see what we called that. We're going to call this hit text, HITTEXT. Great, and I'm just going to kind of grab this, make sure that I have my blinking spacebar, and now I'm going to pull it out just by hitting the my spacebar, which adds some spaces here. That's one way I found to size it. I'm going to justify it in the center, and I'm going to create some red text, and if I click on my arrow tool, now I can kind of position this on the stage. I can also use my arrow key